Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first panel of our day at Future Identity North America. I'm so pleased to be joined by such a brilliant group of speakers this morning, representing some really influential organisations in the identity sector, driving standards, principles and guidance for the development of digital identity systems and technologies and solutions. I think from my perspective, and I'm sure you'll agree, standards and frameworks are really vital in the identity space to establishing trust, driving interoperability in order to see adoption really across all of the areas and the sectors that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the day. So I think a really great place to start, and I'm very excited to hear from all of you and hear about some of the latest and most exciting developments and how you're uniting communities of developers and users as well of digital identity. So if it's okay with you all, I'd like to start by asking each panelist to introduce yourselves and just tell us, a little bit about your organisation or your role within your organisation. So if we start with Kay, if that's okay.
Okay. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really honored to be with such a great group. I'm Kay Chopard. I am the executive director of the Kantara initiative, which is essentially the CEO. And I have actually haven't been there quite a year. From my background, the first half of my career I spent as a practicing attorney working in the courts. And the second half of my career, I have been heading other nonprofits before I came to the Kantara initiative. I know some folks because I helped in the creation of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, which is now 10 years old, here in the US as a public-private partnership and creating a nonprofit. And I walked away and did some other nonprofit work, and I've returned, and I'm very excited to be a part of this community, and I've learned a lot from many of the others here. So thank you for including me.
No, thank you so much for being here. And Andrew, should we come to you next?
Yeah, certainly. So thanks for having me, Laura, and great to be with my fellow panelists. My name is Andrew Shikiar. I serve as co-executive director at FIDO Alliance and also our head of marketing and outbound engagements. FIDO Alliance is an industry body focused on creating open standards and best practices for strong user authentication. So our specifications have been built into just about every device, platform, and browser on the planet, and we're really happy to see more and more companies using this instead of traditional means of authentication, such as passwords and other knowledge-based credentials, such as OTPs. So we have around 250 members worldwide. Really, we feel like it's the right combination of companies to tackle this problem, in the sense that it's all the leading device manufacturers, platforms, leaders in identity, biometrics, and security, and then perhaps most important, a lot of the biggest brands on the planet whose businesses ultimately are dependent on their ability to deliver high assurance services to billions of users worldwide.
No, fantastic, and privileged to have you here. I look forward to hearing more about some of those communities and supporters of adopters of FIDO later. And Joni, should we come to you next?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Laura. It's a real honor and pleasure to be a part of this panel today. My name is Joni Brennan. I'm the president of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. We're a nonprofit association that's focused on unlocking Canada's full and beneficial participation in the global digital economy. We see digital identity that's secure and safe and trustworthy as the methodology to do that. We provide two functionalities. We are both an adoption accelerator, so we help to reduce uncertainty for adoption around digital identity solutions and services. And we collaboratively publish the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, which is an information assurance framework that's fine-tuned to the Canadian ecosystem, yet focused on the global digital economy assurance interoperability. We're about 120 members from Canada and from around the world, and we have worked with many of the organizations in the call today and know some of them personally, so it's a great opportunity to connect and to share what we've learned from each other and how we're working in the ecosystem to move identity forward in a way that's respectful, privacy respectful, and interoperable and trustworthy for the global digital economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Elizabeth, what about you? I know you're doing some work with OpenID Foundation. So yeah, please tell us more.
That's right. Thank you, Laura. And thanks for having me here today. It really is an honor to be on this panel. So I'm Elizabeth Garber. I'm a customer experience expert. I have a history of driving customer-focused strategy and innovation in multiple different industries, including financial services, energy, data, telecommunications, and also nonprofits. Last year, I co-edited a paper called the GAIN paper, which called for a global assured identity network. And it argued that financial institutions are positioned to help bring that concept to life, although they are not alone in being able to do so. So now I'm co-chairing a GAIN technical proof of concept under the auspices of the OpenID Foundation, where I'm a member and a contributor. Our community group is really seeking to test different standards and approaches for the underlying premise of the paper, which is interoperability globally. And it's for this reason that Gail Hodges, the executive director of the OpenID Foundation, I think suggested that I join this panel while she travels, because GAIN really is a collaboration on standards both within and outside of the OpenID Foundation. So I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you so much. And I, again, look forward to diving into some of those themes around interoperability more later in the conversation. But I thought, as this is the first session of the day, it would be interesting maybe to take it back a few steps and think about when we think about digital identity, what really is it that we're aiming for, I suppose. So when thinking about digital identity, what are we hoping to achieve as an end result for individuals and businesses? Perhaps, Andrew, if I could come to you first on that question, what are your thoughts? It's a big question, I think.
Well, it is a big question, and frankly, FIDO Alliance only focuses on a narrow scope part of identity, which is user authentication. But I've been around the identity space long enough now to have some opinions on this. So I think when I think about digital identity, I think about, what do you have to do to bring someone's, offline attributes online and offline behaviors online, and how do you do so securely? As our networked economy has become increasingly focused on an online world, especially with COVID, it's critical that people are able to conduct their online lives as securely and as seamlessly as conduct their offline lives. In fact, one could argue that should be more seamless. So I think, at a high level, that's why I look at digital identity. And again, one component of it that FIDO cares very dearly about is making sure that you can actually, securely take part in this online world. And that's, and one of the biggest challenges that we all face is the threat of hacks and attacks and account takeovers. And our traditional means of authenticating people to their digital identities and to the online world has been fundamentally flawed for too long, right? And so the web itself is built upon passwords, which is okay for some use cases, but ultimately really is not sufficient. Anything that any sort of knowledge-based means of authenticating or onboarding can and will be spoofed and can and will be stolen. Hackers are very good at what they do. So whether it's a phishing attack or a brute force attack or an SMS prompt attack or MFA prompt attack, anything that's relying on the individual, having to depend entirely on their own judgment is far too fallible in our point of view. So we want to move to new means of authentication that really relies on more cryptographic signals and the device that someone possesses. And that's really the key to securely authenticating digital identities and to people conducting their online lives with confidence and securely.
Yes, I think that confidence is key. So both being seamless, but having confidence in the process as well, and much more secure. No, I think that's really interesting. And Elizabeth, would you add anything to that? Is there anything that when you think about digital identity, what do you think we're hoping to sort of achieve as an end goal?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Andrew's just said. I think that there are lots of problems to solve in this space. And these problems all have a real human impact on the end of them. We need confidence that we know who it is on the end of a digital session. We need confidence that our money is going to the person, the human being that we expect it, or the organization that we expect it to be going to. Organizations need to know, does this fingerprint really belong to the person who earned that college degree? So for me, the key word here is trust. Our end-to-end identity solutions need to enable individuals and relying parties to be able to trust one another in order to power the digital economy, in order to promote those social outcomes that we talk about. So individuals need to trust that their identity is in safe hands, whether that's in their own hands or in the hands of a custodian that they trust. They need easy access to be able to assert their identity information wherever they go, whether they're going somewhere online or offline.
Yeah.
And I think that the results for, I mean, you mentioned the results for the individuals, but the end results for RPs, relying parties, matters too. They need to trust the information that they're able to obtain. They need to be able to integrate with all of the providers out there, and they need to be able to offer their end users a really great experience. Otherwise, they're not going to see benefits.
Yeah, so looking at kind of those benefits for trust for the individual, but lots of other relying parties as well. I think it's interesting that both you and Andrew, when talking about what we're looking to achieve, also brought in a lot of what we're looking to avoid, I suppose, and what we are looking to kind of change and perhaps move to something better. I wonder, Kay, I know Kantara looks a lot around good practices in kind of managing identity and personal data. So do you have any thoughts about what we're aiming for here, and what is it that we're kind of trying to avoid? What are some of the real dangers if those good practices are not upheld when we're managing identity and our personal data?
Mm-hmm. I think that that's a good question, and it's helpful to kind of begin to drill down. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the Kantara initiative, in addition to informing and working to develop standards, also runs an assurance program, right, that looks at identity proofing, IAL2, and so forth, and authentication as well, those assurance levels. And in that program, what we see is companies are coming to us, and also government agencies are coming to us, in part is because what we're trying to avoid is that the people who need services can't get them, right? So we're trying to make sure that we are providing this identity and authentication proofing that really helps people get what they need and avoid people being left out. Or the most vulnerable not being able to really access that. But at the same time, we're trying to mitigate risk, right? So we want to make sure that in an effort to provide services, whatever those might be, that we are not allowing risk to enter in to be so permissive that now we are permitting fraud, right? That we are allowing abuse of the system. We hear all the time about identity theft and the issues around that. And that's another way in which, what you don't want is to not provide services, but you also don't want to subject your users to the abuse of their own identities and the kind of havoc that can wreak in their lives. And I guess along with those things, the other piece of that I think in the US anyway, has sometimes gotten a little bit short shrift with the public is the ability to protect and enhance privacy. And that's one of the things that we're very committed to, is to trying to make sure to protect the privacy of not just the identities, but the personal data of those who need to use these kinds of systems. And those are challenges. It's not the easy, you can just go and do that, but the risks of harm that can come from, sharing private data, being able for someone to abuse someone else's identity, all of these things are very real and affect real lives. And I think those are the things we really want to try to avoid.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I read a statistic the other day actually, and I'm not sure how 100% accurate, but I think there's certainly some truth to it. Was that it said 7 out of 10 people in the United States feel that they have little to no control over how that their personal data is collected or kind of stored by private companies. So yeah, I think there's such an important element. And yeah, I liked what you said as well about, you know, making sure people can all access services, but then not leaving them vulnerable to fraud and other harms once they've kind of got that access. No, it's incredibly interesting. And Joni, just to come to you last, kind of similar question, but I'm interested from your perspective, if you think that there's anything kind of unique about Canada's position in the digital identity journey. What are DIACC hoping to achieve when you think about digital identity? What's the end goal there for you?
Yeah, thanks. And just to kind of draw on the last question as well, one of the things that I think is unique that we've done within the DIACC as we have scanned the ecosystem for digital identity research, and particularly for perspectives of Canadians around digital identity. Do they understand what digital identity is, and what are their thoughts about it coast to coast to coast in both official languages? And one of the things that we found in this year's research, we've done it 3 years now, is well, first of all, we found that just under half, most Canadians don't understand intuitively the words digital identity and what that means. They think things like passwords are digital identity, and they think things like social could be digital identity. This year, we asked Canadians, should they have access to data about them that is issued by public sector, federal and provincial governments? And the response was overwhelming. 91% said yes, they want access to that data. That was followed very closely behind by wanting that same kind of access to data in the private sector at 86%. So I think one of the learnings there was they do understand personal data and want access and control over that data intuitively. They don't necessarily understand digital identity per se. But I'd say what's unique about DIACC as well is that our mission is actually focused on unlocking benefits in the global digital economy in a secure and trustworthy way. So our mission is actually not an identity mission, it's an economic benefits and social benefits focused mission. We see identity as the way of getting there. And because of that, and as we were founded from a mandate from the Ministry of Finance, from Finance Canada, we do have participation of nearly every major bank in Canada, as well as nearly every credit union, as well as many other stakeholders in the ecosystem, sitting alongside federal government, provincial government, municipal governments. So that kind of collaborative, I think, is unique with regard to Canada. Also, the work that we're doing with the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, which is not a standard, it's a high-level framework for defining assurance outcomes and policy and that align with policy and regulatory needs. We're broad in scope, and so we are inclusive of people identity, and we are inclusive of organizational identity, which you can imagine is important for things like beneficial ownership and economic use cases. So I think that area of scope is unique as well, and we're completely focused on this, what I call interoperability around assurance, and working with all the standards that are out in the ecosystem. So those are a few unique things maybe about the Canadian approach.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. I thought that was really interesting what you were saying around education, I suppose, maybe being a key part of it, users perhaps not knowing enough about digital identity, maybe even to know whether they're adopting it or if they would want to. I wonder, others on the panel, is that a kind of a key part of other work at your organizations around that education piece? Anyone? You go.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Joni, and we see it time and time again. So, you know, we don't really do direct consumer education, but we've done some usability testing. I'll talk more about usability in a little bit, but
Yes.
one thing we've seen through these tests, and again, we're looking at it in the authentication context, but getting people familiar with how these technologies work and the privacy implications, which are positive if you're using FIDO, but how these things all come together, I think is absolutely critical. And then we partner with groups like in the U.S. government with like NCSA and CISA, you know, on their own consumer education initiatives. So I totally agree. People need to be aware of what their digital identity means and how to leverage it most effectively and how to protect themselves.
Mm. No, absolutely. Kay, did you, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that for us, I think we also don't have a consumer education focus or piece,
Yes.
and we don't go to the extent like Joni does with DIACC and doing an actual survey. But so in many ways, we're looking more across industries. And what I'm finding is just in the past week, I met with industry representatives in a whole new vertical that has never really realized or recognized what identity management means for the work that they do. And now they're suddenly realizing, oh my gosh, this is a lot of what we do. And I think some of it is they just haven't called it by that name, yet they're concerned about all the things that we've talked about, right? They want to avoid fraud. They want to avoid identity theft. They want to avoid sharing of private data, all these kinds of things. They just haven't thought of it in this context. And I think we spend a lot more time educating a variety of not the private sector, but also the public sector to really understand what this is and why it's so significant and why it permeates so many different things. And I hope that in the process of that, we're also helping them focus on their own consumer education. Who are the users of their systems? Why is it important that they're educated as well? Why is it that if we have a better educated public, better educated users, we actually improve the safety, the privacy, and all of the enhancements that we're trying to put together if our users are also educated, if that makes sense. So
absolutely.
It's not nearly as direct.
Role, yes, in keeping themselves safe in a way, I suppose.
And Laura, can I add in one little note too? Sorry, I got excited about the personal data access stat as I was listening to Kay's response. And one thing I had wanted to say around the uniqueness was each of the organizations in this call are working on unique areas of digital identity. And I think it would be great for the audience to know as well. As we were preparing, we were sharing with each other, we have some reviews happening. Should we be working, sharing this with each other? So I think everyone should know we're all unique. We do coordinate quite a bit in terms of our strengths and what we have to offer to the ecosystem and to each other. So
yeah, absolutely. I think Elizabeth actually described to me earlier today as different pieces of the puzzle, which I quite liked, coming together. Yeah, no, I'd absolutely, I'd agree. And so I'd like to now maybe look at some of the kind of ways that we're moving forward. So where are we now, but also where are we seeing progress in some of these areas that we've talked about, like enhancing privacy, keeping personal data safer, and creating greater interoperability. Elizabeth, I wonder if I could come back to you, and perhaps if you could expand a little on some of the significant initiatives like the GAIN that you're working on at the moment, and where are you kind of seeing progress in some of those areas?
Sure. So I'll start by taking a step back from GAIN and just speak a little bit on behalf of the OpenID Foundation itself.
No,
so
please do. Yeah.
We have many active working groups who are continuing to collaborate and collaborating with others outside of the foundation to build on the OpenID Connect standard, which is already used by billions around the world. So these working groups are continuing to see how these standards enable use cases in healthcare, finance, telecommunications, self-sovereign identity, and those requiring really high trust, know your customer, KYC assurance. So each one of those working groups will partner with other organizations as appropriate to kind of ensure that we're considering how standards interact with one another and build upon each other. That really does come across in the work that I and others are leading with the GAIN community group. So the point, as I mentioned earlier, is to drive towards a globally interoperable network for identity assurance. So to do this, we're really bringing in and kicking the tires on technical standards from inside and outside of the foundation. We have identity providers from different trust networks around the world participating. We have participants that include multiple self-sovereign identity wallets. So we're looking at standards from W3C to the Decentralized Identity Foundation, Trust over IP, GLIFE, you name it. If it's relevant to the question of interoperability, we're looking at it, or we would look at it. Maybe there are things we don't know about that we need to look at. At the same time, so that's the technical proof of concept part of GAIN, but at the same time, I'm struggling for words because GAIN itself is not an entity really, it's an idea.
Yes.
But we have kind of a loosely coupled steering group, which is made up of 5 nonprofits at the moment, and we're actively inviting more nonprofits to come and help us steer the ship. So our partners at the Open Identity Exchange, or OIX, they're leading efforts to kind of tease out the problems of governance and rules, legal and regulatory interoperability, if you will, that would be associated with this network. And then others who are steering GAIN would include the Cloud Signature Consortium. They're driving standards in relation to e-signature. We have the Institute of International Finance. They help keep us connected to the needs of the financial services industry. And GLIFE, whose work on organizational identity is unparalleled and is going to be essential to the future of this network. So really excited to be collaborating and trying to think end to end about that puzzle that we were just talking about earlier.
Yes, it really does come back to that, doesn't it? All those organizations with different key focuses, but, you know, kind of coming together for something bigger there. I think that's really, really interesting. You mentioned kind of around trust frameworks as well. And I know, Joni, you said earlier you're working on the Pan-Canadian trust framework. So I wonder if you could kind of expand a little bit on some of the key developments you've been seeing at DIACC, how you're working to drive the adoption of identity through that trust framework and plenty of other initiatives, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting ecosystem without a doubt, and so we've the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework version 1 is available. The team has already been hard at work adding new components into this stack, if you will. We are launching the Voila Verify. This is our assurance program, focused specifically on the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. I think one of the exciting areas that's been coming forward is we have out for review right now a digital wallet component for the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. So if you think about we don't see standardization fully yet, and may not for a while with regard to the technologies and the implementations around digital wallets. So if you have an ecosystem where governments or high assurance issuers of data would like to have assurance with regard to where their credentials are going, which kinds of wallets, our framework will help to, this component will help to know at what kind of level, how much we can trust each of those wallet implementations. So I think that's in the road to adoption, and as we work with both more traditional federated models and through the distributed and self-sovereign models, being able to provide that assurance in a very distributed ecosystem around something like a digital wallet is key. We're also looking at the what we would call a trust registry, which would enable wallets and issuers to be able to call to understand the assurance of that wallet, the assurance of that credential. So that's some of the newer work coming forward. Driving adoption on the framework, I think, has to be both meeting the needs in terms of what exists today. It also has to be meeting the needs of where the ecosystem may go and have that flexibility to be able to walk and chew gum and do both at the same time. In addition to that, we're looking forward to developing mappings, working around cross-recognition with organizations like the Kantara initiative, organizations that are working in the assurance space, and other frameworks that are fully operated by federal governments, for example. So I think, again, this collaboration and cross-recognition, and then that flexibility to work with what we have today, both and where we're going at the same time, are some of the kind of key pillars of how we work toward adoption in this ecosystem.
Fascinating. No, it's so much going on, and great to hear and listen to how you're all kind of working together as well. Yeah, no, it's really fantastic. And Andrew, I've been hearing a little bit about FIDO in the news recently. There's been the announcement that Google, Apple, and Microsoft will expand their FIDO support. So yeah, just wondered if you could, maybe mention a little bit about that, but also I'm sure there's many other kind of initiatives and areas that you're working on at the moment. So where are you seeing some real progress? What's exciting for you at the moment?
Yeah, great question, Laura. Thank you. It's interesting. FIDO Alliance, our specifications are pretty mature. Our authentication specs are, and as I mentioned before, they've been built into pretty much every device on the planet. Now that being said, we haven't quite seen the adoption curve that one would hope. Now we have seen a lot of early adoption, right? So we see companies like Google and Twitter and Facebook and the U.S. government and various governments supporting FIDO for secure authentication for their online services. But there's a very long tail of service providers who are still kind of sitting on the sidelines. And that's why usability has become so important. As I mentioned before, a lot of my conversations these days about FIDO begin and end with usability. And I think that's because, a lot of companies who had FIDO deployments on the books started looking at it from a security point of view. And the security teams have done their analysis, they have everything ready to go. And then when it gets time to roll this out, all of a sudden the product leads are like, wait a second, what's my customer experience going to look like? And so they have concerns about it and want to make sure that it's smooth. And so today, historically, with FIDO built into platforms, that means you could basically use the WebAuthn protocol to enable passwordless sign-in flows on, say, your PC or your Android phone or iPhone, where you use the device unlock mechanism to log in rather than a password, which is highly secure, right? And so, but even that has some UX challenges in the sense that it's new. We were talking before about consumer education. Last year in 2021, FIDO released our first ever UX guidelines for platform authenticators. So this is a use case where, say, you're an online merchant or a bank, you want your customers to use the device authenticator. What do you have to do to get them to use it, right? And there's actually a lot of nuance to that. So we assembled an expert group of UX and design leads from some of the biggest brands on the planet. So companies like Visa and Apple and JP Morgan Chase and Intuit, who helped drive this project. We had kind of a 3-phase testing program led by an expert UX firm that broke down every step of the user flow, from them being primed to enroll for this, on through to enrollment and login and sign out and customer support. And so what that resulted in are these guidelines and also a reference implementation for how we see the optimal way of deploying FIDO to platform authenticators today. And that's on our website. We get a lot of positive feedback on it. Now, that being said, that's our first step in usability. We realize that we have to do even more. Part of FIDO security posture, and I know we're not going deep into tech today, but we use asymmetric public key cryptography, which basically means instead of having the user, log in with their knowledge-based credential to the server, we introduce the concept of an authenticator. The authenticator, in essence, mediates this authentication relationship by implementing a unique key pair for each account for each user. There's a public key on the server and a private key stored securely on the device. Unlike a password, the public key has no value. So if a hacker steals it, they can't reuse it. And the private key on the device needs to be activated by the user, right? So she verifies herself with a biometric or a local PIN, but it's all local on that device. So no human readable shared secret is transmitted over the wire where it can be hacked. So that's a wonderful security posture. But part of what FIDO's always required is that you have to re-enroll each device for each service. So if I'm doing this on my iPhone and then I go to the same service on my iPad or my PC, I'll need to re-enroll again. That presents a couple of challenges. One is the usability challenge in that, well, geez, why do I have to keep on doing this? But also it presents a security challenge in the sense that the relying party needs to retain this knowledge-based credential for the user to recover it. So in essence, we're taking 3 steps forward and 1 step back, and we want to be taking 5 steps forward. So what we announced this week was the intent to do what we call multi-device FIDO credentials, such that the private key can be made immediately available to users anywhere on their device cloud. So in the scenario where I log in first with my iPhone, then go to my iPad, I'll have the same, same user experience where all I have to do is present my biometric. So we're very excited about this, and we're very excited to have Apple, Microsoft, and Google join us in a multi-party announcement that they not only endorse this vision, but will be supporting it in their products and services.
No, that's incredible. You couldn't get a better announcement, I don't think, than that they're all three supporting it. I think the usability and security elements you mentioned there are really, really compelling. But I just am curious, do you think that there's, into getting these getting businesses and more organizations to adopt and not to sit on the sidelines, as you said, is there any kind of sort of regulation or legislation element to that, that driving it from kind of a government or legislative down perspective?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And that's kind of, so FIDO's tagline is simpler, stronger authentication. So I just talked about this simple aspect, the usability aspect for consumers. But it's also easier to deploy. And I think a lot of regulators see this. So in the US, for example, we've worked very closely with different regulatory bodies in the United States and globally. But in the US, the Biden administration last year had some cybersecurity mandates, which have then been taken up by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and also CISA, which is a center point. Well, CISA, I always forget the acronym. But both two of them have pointed to FIDO as a means of providing unphishable user authentication. So the use case I talked about before were kind of like the common devices, but really the gold standard for FIDO authentication from a security standpoint remains a FIDO security key. And these are created by companies like Yubico with their YubiKeys, Paytm, Google, and many others. This is typically an external authenticator that you can use to verify that you're in possession of your device and to insert it into a device and just touch it to prove possession as a second factor. What OMB said for the first time is that government agencies in the US, in order to comply with the zero trust architecture mandates that they've recommended, for the first time, these agencies can use any unphishable authenticator. So historically, they've used PIV and CAC, and these are advanced smart cards that also use public key cryptography, but those are very hard to actually deploy at scale, right? That requires people coming in and actually proofing themselves and getting a card with their photo ID on it along with the card itself. But what they're recommending is that FIDO security keys are an equally effective means of enabling the strong phishing resistant authentication, but in a much simpler way for these agencies to deploy at scale to both agency employees as well as external contractors and to citizens.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Another part of the puzzle, I suppose, the push from that endorsement, I guess, and by legislation. Kay, if I could just swing back to you, I know it was mentioned earlier that you're collaborating with some of the other organisations on the panel today. But what are some of the initiatives Kantara are working on at the moment? That you're really particularly excited about. I know I've heard about your kind of involvement with the mobile driving license, which is taking off in the US. Quite rapidly. But what are some of the most exciting kind of developments and progress that you're seeing?
Well, that's a good question. And just to follow on about mobile driver's licenses, actually, Kantara had a discussion group that issued a report about mobile driver's licenses. And from that, however, we built on to a little bit larger work group focusing not just on driver's licenses, but mobile credentials, which we've heard other people here today talking about some of the work that they're doing in that as well. And our focus on that is privacy enhancing mobile credentials. That's, I've talked about privacy before. That's really part of our mission, to make sure that we protect the privacy of personal data and of the users. And so we're looking to leverage a lot of this work, and we have some terrific partners at the table with us as well. Some of the companies that FIDO has talked about are also partnering with us on this kind of work. And but along with that, we're looking to continue to expand and grow our assurance program. As you know, we do third-party assessments and we accredit technology solutions, in particular for, as I mentioned, for NIST standard 863, which is identity assurance, authentication assurance, and also federation assurance. But I think the exciting thing for us is that now, in addition to doing that here in the US, we are also expanding into the UK, and they have asked us to be a certification body there and to be certifying against their digital identity and attributes trust framework. And then here in the US, for me, this is exciting. As I kind of mentioned before, we're working more and more in industries that have not traditionally had what I would call is a well-defined type of identity and authentication framework that they've worked with or that they've considered. So a good example in the US is we're now working in the healthcare industry. And in the healthcare industry, we have really partnered with the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of the National Coordinator, and many other organizations in this space because healthcare providers are recognizing that, yes, they want to protect the privacy of their patients because, in part, there are US laws about that. But also, I think the pandemic made it more clear the significance of trying to share information about specific patients to make sure that they get the best care that they can get and to make sure that misinformation isn't out there. And that they're getting real-time ability to exchange information when they need it. And to do that, they have recognized the importance of standards, recognize the importance of those accreditation programs that we offer to make sure that the providers that they look to are actually meeting those standards. And in the end, I think everyone benefits. So that is one industry that is very much heating up, and there are others that are in the pipeline. So it's an exciting time for us as we've sort of expanded beyond the traditional companies that work with federal agencies and government to more those that are actually more public serving and public facing. So I think that's some of the exciting stuff.
I would really agree. I think there's so much happening in the healthcare space in terms of identity at the moment. We're seeing some amazing innovations in that space, some of which I think will be discussed in some of the sessions later today. So yeah, that's great to hear that that's a new area of focus there. Well, we've talked a lot about all the fascinating and, really important work that you're all doing and how you're kind of working with each other in different ways as well. But just, I'd like to come back to kind of some of the things that we raised at the beginning when I asked everybody what kind of we're aiming for when it comes to digital identity. So what more, I suppose, needs to be done to kind of achieve that goal? We talked about enabling collaboration, different relying parties and different industries to be able to collaborate around identity. We talked about some interoperability aspects, across different sectors and even across borders. So I guess what more do we need to do to achieve this? Perhaps Elizabeth, you might have some thoughts on this from your perspective with the work you discussed.
Yeah, thank you. So as we've been talking about, identity is a huge multifaceted topic. And as everyone on the panel has spoken really eloquently about, the solutions and the standards that we develop is going to have real powerful impact on people. So I believe, as a customer experience expert, and I would say this with that background, I believe we're only going to achieve the social outcomes that we want if we think end to end about the solutions and how they're going to work for real people. I love what I heard from Andrew a few minutes ago about bringing in experts in UX and CX as we're designing these standards. And as we've already talked about, we're all parts of the same puzzle. We're all piecing this together. In different areas. So it is only by working together and with the right blend of skills and experiences that we're going to make each other stronger and deliver the good outcomes for people. So with that in mind, and with your question about collaboration, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to invite collaboration wherever we can and to make it easy for others to find out about and engage in the work on the ground. So whether that's the way that we structure membership options, how to get involved in community groups, working groups, how we design legal agreements, how we help people navigate issues around IP, technical arrangements, and the collaboration tools we offer, I think we should be constantly considering and iterating upon the ways that we enable these groups to form and actually do work. So in game, we invite anyone to join the technical proof of concept. We invite them as individuals or organizations, regardless of whether you're a member of the OpenID Foundation. We only ask that you read and sign the participation agreement before you contribute. From my experience, this is quite a unique way of working, and we're going to see how it how it pans out as we test our hypotheses. And as we go, I think we should always be reflecting on how we can bring more people to the table.
Absolutely. Joni, what about yourself? Do you have sort of any more thoughts to add to what Elizabeth said? How do we, make sure that we enable that greater collaboration between different groups and relying parties as well?
Yeah, I would say kind of we need to do what we've been doing, but do even more. And so in terms of similar to collaboration, coordination. And so I think we do see a lot of collaboration within the groups that we've shared here today, many membership organizations, many participant organizations. I think if we could also see even added coordination. Governments are very large places, so coordination between the large departments of the governments and kind of their approach for identity and how are they coordinated for leveraging these types of solutions, whether they're using the same one or leveraging an ecosystem of solutions. So seeing more coordination in that space and building on what we already have as well. I would agree with Elizabeth. The financial ecosystem already has a lot of groundwork in place, so we'd like to see also more use of what we have and more opportunities to explore that. I think the second piece is around policy. For us here in Canada, the path is not very entirely clearly defined that public sector's job does not end until they make that data available to you in an interoperable and verified format. So that may be leveraging one standard or one technical approach, that may be leveraging more than one technical approach. And so those credit cards, those permanent resident cards, citizenship proof, making those available in interoperable formats that can be used in multiple networks or across multiple ecosystems. So there's some policy revision to be done to make that clear, at least in our ecosystem. And I think last and absolutely not least, much more education. I think in the frameworks and standards and association space, quite often if we do what we do well, it becomes invisible to people, and so sometimes we aim for that. When we are in a topic like digital identity that's related to personal data, people do have concerns, and so I come back again to coordination and collaboration. That education piece is not something any single organization here or out in the audience can do. It is something that requires close collaboration and thoughtfulness with public sector, private sector, and NGOs and organizations who represent different stakeholder groups. So we need more education in the space. That's both end users, but also within industry, because we even find within industry, they look at a challenge that they have and they may not understand the digital identity component of that challenge and where we can help. So lots and lots of education.
Fantastic. Andrew, I saw you nodding a lot there when Joni was speaking.
Oh, yeah.
Would you add anything to that, or why do you think standards and frameworks are so vital? And yeah, what more needs to be done, I suppose?
Just add amen to what Joni said.
Yeah.
She's spot on. I think it's really important, and collaboration is really important. And as we look a little broader about what we need to do to enable interoperability and collaboration between groups, like a lot of this happens already. These four groups work together already. We as a body, FIDO Alliance, we have a very active liaison program where we liaise with other .orgs and other standards bodies to address adjacent use cases, address market education, maybe regional education. And these are things that we think are absolutely critical to driving awareness and adoption of not just FIDO authentication, but broader kind of standards-based identity technologies. So I think it's all very important. We also do stuff like at our member meetings, all our liaison partners are welcome to join. And to the point of educating the broader industry at large, we've actually launched an initiative, actually a public conference called Authenticate, which is a public conference where anyone who wants to get deeper on authentication can come. So we had our first physical event last year in the midst of COVID, and we still had a couple hundred people show up to our hybrid event last October, and we're hoping to build on that in 2022. But and I'm not here to promote Authenticate, although I kind of What I thought was really cool about that event was, first of all, it was really nice to see people meet in person again for the first time in a while.
Yes.
But the content was very rich. But there's really kind of like this missionary feeling behind what we're trying to do. And I think every organization would say the same thing. The people who came there to learn were all deeply committed to the standards-based approach for user authentication. And so, it's different than working like for a product company, or most product companies, where there is this kind of missionary zeal behind what we're all trying to do, because everyone understands that digital identity is a massive challenge, a massive opportunity, and that we do need to collaborate and we do need to get this right. And people are genuinely excited, I think genuinely want to contribute to these efforts, to really better society at large.
You can really feel that listening to all of you speak today, but also all the many other speakers that that we have at some of our events. You can really feel that kind of mission feeling, like you say. Yeah, it is. Yeah, a really fascinating industry, I think, to be part of, and to kind of be behind, I suppose. Yeah, well, so much has been covered. But Kay, come to you. Anything that you would kind of add in terms of why standards and frameworks are so kind of vital in the space? I suppose we've talked a lot about how all of you kind of collaborating together and driving kind of progress. But we've talked a little bit as well about kind of awareness from organisations adopting identity. I suppose there's a bit of, I kept thinking, I wonder how many over the last few years have rushed kind of to adopt digital solutions, and perhaps then, oh gosh, identity has to be a part of that. And really it's become apparent that I suppose it is possible to do it wrong if there's not some kind of protections and those standards and frameworks in place. So yeah, I'd love to know if you had any views to add to what the other panelists have already said so well.
Well, they've said some amazing things, and I'm not sure how much I can add, but except that, yes, I agree. I think there is one area, though, that I just would like to raise, and that is the equitable exchange of information. I think equity is something we didn't really touch on today, and it's becoming more and more pronounced that is problematic. And, here's the thing. And what I hope we will be able to do in the future, I find a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, a lot of government entities doing things to address equity where really what they're trying to do is raise awareness.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it does any good for me to say, oh, I'm so sorry you don't have a coat and you're freezing in this blizzard, and walk away, right?
Yeah.
I raised awareness, didn't really do anything. So I'm hoping in the next few years, we're going to be able to find strategies and find ways to actually solve for this, and not just raise awareness that it's an issue and something you should think about when you develop your product. So
you probably should consider having a coat. You might.
Yes. We really need to solve for this. And I think sometimes we try to pick up on things that seem easy, the low-hanging fruit, as they say, when really to solve for some of this is probably going to be a lot harder. And it's probably going to be not an easy fix that we wish it would be, but I think it's important that we tackle it no matter how hard it is. And I think there's a lot of potential there in the future. So I didn't want us to end today without at least raising that. And clearly everyone's nodding their head. So you're all thinking the same thing as me. So
there's always something, really interesting and important that comes up in the last 2 minutes of a panel. So yeah, no, I would, as I say, I would love to dive into that more, but we do just have a couple of minutes left. So thank you for making that point, Kay, before we close up. I think that's really important. And just I thought to end, it would be fun if I just asked each of you, what do you think, from your prediction, is the most exciting development that you see coming in the near future for digital identity? It can be anything from any of the things that we've spoken about today, but yeah, I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on that. So, Kay, why don't we come to you?
I was really hoping I was going to be last.
I was going to be last. Who wants to jump in first, though? Someone.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think what I just raised about equity,
It's gonna
that's where I for me, that would be the most exciting. If we could really address equity, diversion, inclusion, and really move the needle, I think that would be a really exciting development in the future.
And Andrew, what about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'm going to lean towards what we do, which is getting rid of passwords.
Yeah.
Like, I often get the question, when are we going to get rid of passwords? I don't think that's really the right question. The question is, when are we going to have less passwords? And so I'm more focused on less passwords and passwordless.
Yeah.
But I think we're well on that path.
And not to rely on passwords, I suppose.
Yeah, less reliance on passwords and moving towards a truly passwordless future. But look, we've all been, or FIDO Alliance has been fighting this fight for several years now, almost 10 years. But I do feel like we're turning the corner, and the announcement we made this week will allow people to start taking credentials off their servers. And that's what needs to happen for us to stop this cycle of kind of credential-driven attacks and account takeovers. So yeah, I'm excited for a less password future.
Fantastic. Elizabeth, we'll quickly come to you. What are you excited about coming up in digital ID?
Well, I'm excited about how the internet is changing generally. This move towards decentralization, the potential, the possibilities of DeFi, and how we facilitate those changes by treating identity information as assets that individuals own and control wherever they are in the world. And I'm excited about how our standards will knit together, I guess, to enable users equitably throughout that shift.
And finally, Joni, any closing thoughts to add?
Gosh, everyone had such great things they're excited about. It's hard to add them, but I think all of what was said by the group. I look forward to seeing how this ecosystem has been coming together and how it will continue to come together. I really look forward to more thoughtful policy as well, that builds in that inclusion by default, that equitability by default, and seeing the emergence and codification of data access and empowerment with that access to that verified data as part of the privacy picture, so I think seeing that ecosystem and how we all work together really start to take shape. It's been exciting to see. It's already happening, and starting to see more and more of that adoption and more of how these come together with that thoughtful design, which is a work in progress. So I think as stewards of this space, I'm excited to be in it, and I think this is something that we'll be continuing to work on because the space will evolve, and we always have to make sure that we're doing better for society and for economic growth for everyone. So yeah, I'm excited for those things.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's an amazing note to end on. Thank you all so much. I can't thank you enough for joining us this morning. It's been, a very inspirational start to the day, I think. So thank you, Kay, Andrew, Joni, and Elizabeth.